I'm going to continue with Oneness versus the 1% by Vandana Shiva and Kritika Shiva. The money machine of the 1%. 1% is not just a number, it is a system, an economic system shaped by the rich and powerful, where unbridled greed and accumulation are seen as virtues to be rewarded by society. Instead of aberrations which must be kept within limits through social and democratic processes, it is a model in which who produces what is produced, or whether anything at all in fact produced, are questions that disappear from the economic equation. They are replaced by tools of money-making, or what Aristotle called charismatics. It affects an economic apartheid between the haves and the have-nots, which translates into an ecological apartheid between the lives and live-nots, not just in the human family, but in the earth family. The rise of the 1% embodies a will to exclude, an urge to exterminate. Its inevitable consequences are ecocide and genocide. The Oxfam report, An Economy for the 1%, reveals that the richest own as much as 3.6 billion people do, the bottom 50% of humanity, while the wealth of the richest 62 people in the world increased by more than 45% between 2010 and 2016, an increase of more than $500 billion from 542 billion to 1.76 trillion. The wealth of the bottom half fell by just over $1 trillion over the same period, a drop of 38%. In 2010, 388 individuals had as much wealth as the poorest half. In 2011, the figure was 177. In 2012, it dropped to 159. In 2013, it went down further to 92. In 2014, it was 80. And in 2017, the figure came down to just 8. Today, the financial sector, where the rich make money out of money, has increased to 15% of the GDP in most countries worldwide, including India and the US. As the Oxfam report indicates, in the economy of the 1%, 437 of the largest corporations in 2014 were financial, and their assets were 5 times greater than those of corporations in other sectors. Following the 2008 financial crisis, the richest 1% captured 95% of the world's growth, reports the Wall Street Journal, while ordinary people lost jobs, homes, pensions and security. Those gambling in the financial markets got richer. Financial deregulation, which included removing the separation between savings and investments, created an economic based on speculation excuse me, with financial economy overtaking the real economy and depleting it of oxygen in multiple ways. From 2009, when the Great Recession officially ended, although 2012, the top 1% of Americans raked in 95% out of every dollar of increased income. Almost 1/3 of the national increase went to just 16,000 households. The top 1% of the top 1%, as Thomas Piketty and Emmanuel Chazes, analyzers of Internal Revenue Service, IRS, data showed graphs above that income change for the vast. There's just a little graph there. For the vast majority are just as revealing. The bottom 90% saw their average income rise 8.8% in 1934 over the previous year. The year 1933 marked the beginning of recovery from the Great Depression, and 2012, the same statistical group had to get by on 15.7% less than in 2009. Piketty points out that the 1% made more money from capital investments, whereas others get money from wages because capital income is unequally distributed, it led to growing inequality. He shows that whether capital is taxed or not, inequality will grow under current policies because savings from current wages and salaries cannot grow as much as returns on existing wealth. According to Piketty, the process of accumulating becomes more rapid and inelegant as the return of capital rises and the overall economic growth rate falls. The 1% economy is not just a system of economic inequality, it has implications for the planet, for society and for democracy, because it symbolises a system of thought and intellectual paradigm based on a worldview of separation, extraction and extermination. The robber barons of today are in information technology and in finance, agriculture and biotechnology, and the three are covering in the digital economy through digital tools. Nature is made an enemy and humans start to race against nature. Those in the global casinos see nature and life as a tyranny. In their book, The Fishermen and the Rhinos, How International Finance Shapes Everyday Life, Eric Briers and Francis DeVaron describe what they call the tyranny of the real economy. What the financial economy enables us to do, they argue, is to break free of that tyranny. Risks can be moved through and use the derivatives not only to the right people, but to also move forward in the future to wait for the right time. By trading swaps for swaps, bundling debts and reselling them as assets. And by selling derivatives on these assets, risks can be moved around until they are in exactly the right place as determined by the market. Among examples of businesses that have successfully broken free of this tyranny, the authors mentioned Erin and mortgage-backed securities, but Erin collapsed and subprime crisis triggered by the securitization of mortgages left the world with 2018 financial crisis, as Justine Podder writes in Counterpunch. The question for society is whether we want to live, if we want our lives to be devoted to saving elites from the monstrous power gambles for obscene amounts of money, or whether we would rather absorb the more moderate risk that everyday people have to take seeking decent survival. That would not automatically happen if the rules were changed to reassert the tyranny of the real economy, but would require a very different sort of real economy. Corporations and sectors that did not exit a few decades ago accounts for the fastest growth in profits today and for the largest number of the new moguls. First, the billionaires and robber barons who emerged over the last 2 decades are creating their own investment strategies and rental economies, with rents collected through royalties on patents, on seeds, on software, on algorithms to process big data. Speculation, predation and rents are their primary source of profit. Second, with the unreasonable concentration of wealth in the hands of the 1%, which is wealth without work, and multiplies as much faster rates than that at which the real economy based on real production can grow. The investment funds owned by the 1% can buy up large shares in big corporation and drive mergers in order to further multiply profits. This is how the merger between Monsanto and Bayer took place. Finally, the 1% is also creating mergers between those technology spheres that were earlier separate. Thus, whereas information technology, IT, was separate from finance, was separate from biotechnology in agriculture, those boundaries are now gone. IT, through Digitalisation now drives both the financial world and the economy, and it is driving the next phase of industrial agriculture, described as digital agriculture and farming without farmers. Money as mere means of exchange of real goods and services produced through real work becomes capital, a mysterious force for creating wealth. Capital then mutates into investment, which mutates through multiple constructions into returns on investments, where those who do no real work but control wealth created through the exploitation of nature and of people accumulate more wealth and use that wealth to further exploit nature and society. The ecological crises grow, poverty, misery and exclusion grow. Many intellectuals wonder how we got into this mess. A fashionable answer is neoliberalism, but neoliberalism is nothing more than the economic paradigm naturalising the violent imposition of corporate rule and the rule of the 1%. It is true that contemporary corporate globalisation, based on the neoliberal paradigm, has created the huge number of handful of corporations, but corporations have not always existed. They were created as an instrument of colonisation. They do not come into existence out of thin air. They were born out of context created by just the right amount of power and money in the absence of democracy. Neither neoliberalism nor corporate globalisation are new. They began 5 centuries ago with the age of Columbus, who had set out for India but reached the Americas. His journey to plunder became the discovery of America, of the East India Company in 1600, specifically created to plunder India. The foundations of contemporary corporate rule and corporate globalisation were laid. The poverty created by corporate colonialism was then essentialised and separate from its cause, and over the centuries the disease has been offered as the cure. A myth has grown that only corporations can run an economy and only they can write the rules of the economy of trade and commerce. Aspects of life that were never part of commerce have been privatised under the new rules of free trade. Seeds became Monsanto's intellectual property, and which is collected royalties and rent. Food is now a commodity traded by merchants of grain like Cargill and transformed into junk by Coca-Cola and Pepsi, Nestle and Kellogg's. Large corporations define freedom as free trade, which is corporate globalisation. The freedom of corporations and their masked owners is misused to destroy the Earth's ecological fabric and fabric of people's economies and societies. Free trade rules are written by corporations to enlarge their freedom to commodify and privatise the last inch of land, the last drop of water, the last seed, the last serving of food and the last bite of information, the last bit of data, knowledge and imagination. The deregulation of corporations and the policing and criminalisation of citizens has enormous impact on our lives. Livelihoods and freedoms, coalition and spread of corporate power undermining the real economies that nourish and sustain people is one impact. Another major consequence has been mutations in politics and representative democracy, moving rapidly from being of the people, by the people, for the people, to the corporation, by the corporation, for the corporations. Worse, the concentration of economic power in the hands of a small group of unelected, unaccountable individuals translates into political power to influence governments, laws and policies to shape the future of our food and health and of the planet. In India, the highest policy-making body, Niti Aayog, also serving executive function, constitutes peoples whose only expertise is corporate, free trade and free liberalisation, the promotion of imports when we don't need them, the undemocratic undermining of government institutions working as per the Constitution to protect the farmers' rights to seed and people's rights to affordable and safe medicine, pushing GMOs and hazardous medicines. These are examples of corporate metrics outweighing real life. Niti Aayog has become a one-stop shop for global corporate lobby groups to transform India's economy into their private backyard markets. This is systemic corruption of our democracy and a receipt of destruction of people's economies, the concentration of economic power and the systemic wipeout of local economies create unemployment, displacement and economic insecurity. These insecurities are then used by the powerful to divide societies along racial, ethnic and religious lines. The fragmentation and disintegration of societies is imminently linked to the extractive economic model of wealth accumulation by a few. How the billionaires make money out of money while controlling our real world and our lives. In 1994, Joel Kurtzman wrote, "The financial economy is somewhere between 20 to 50 times larger than the real economy. It is not the economy of trade but of speculation. Its commerce is in financial instruments, and while its ultra-high-tech infrastructure straddles the globe and moves several $1 trillion a day between the major and minor nodes of networks, it is largely unregulated. Few people realise money in its traditional sense has met its demise. Fewer still have paused to reflect on its impact." Corporate globalisation and the World Bank and International Monetary Fund IMF driven structural adjustment programme of the 1980s led to the deregulation of financial markets in a number of countries. In retail banking, investment banks and stockbrokers merged to create universal banks which were free to deal in all forms of financial services, make investments in client companies and function as much as possible as a one-stop supplier of both retail and wholesale financial services. Insurance, pension, mutual money, market and hedge fund loans and credits and securities. By the end of 2001, the world's 15 largest financial services providers included 4 non-banks. In 1999, US President Bill Clinton signed into law the Gam-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, which repealed some of the provisions of the Glass-Steagall Act. Globalisation led to a significant internationalisation of financial markets, integrating the world into one financial system. By the 2000, non-bank financial players had started to dominate the financial sector. Central banks determined, among other things, interest rates, nudging the economy along at the direction of their billionaire control agents. A little research into central banks indicates that they are primarily private enterprises, unaccountable to the people whose financial status they govern. It is clear that over the last 3 decades, central banks have pushed the agenda of the 1%. What needs to be examined carefully is the objective of the 1% in openly hijacking central banks. What J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller were to the age of robber barons, Microsoft, Bill Gates and Berkshire Hathaway's Warren Buffett, as well as digital moguls like Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, are to the contemporary age of the rule of the 1%. Then, as now, the super rich used governments to write laws and rules to allow them to accumulate unlimited wealth, then and now creating monopolies by enclosing the commons and killing competition is the strategy for becoming the 1%. We'll leave it there for now.